Item 7A, Finance Committee. Committee Chairman Donato, do you have a report?
Yes, I do. Finance Committee met yesterday, went over several items, and the first item that we went through, which is A1, consideration of possible action to approve the check register for May 3rd through the 16th. I move we approve it.
I'll second.
Any more discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Shelley Sourcewell?
Yes.
Keith Dias?
Yes.
Frank Donato?
Yes.
Justin Lane? Justin?
Yes, sorry, my phone's acting up.
Thank you. Robert Harris?
Yes.
Marlon Barnes?
Yes.
Gary Van Dam?
Yes.
It's approved.
Okay, that brings us to item A2, the consideration of possible action to approve the treasurer's report for the month ending April 30th. I move on order 7A2.
Second.
I do have a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so in your agenda, Teresa gave us an overview yesterday. I just wanted to point out that the interest rate is interesting. It's gone up to overall basically our increase of 1.44%, which is one of the highest I've seen in probably 5 or 6 years. So just wanted to bring that. Yeah, and also our reserves. We got doing real well with the reserves, and of course our water bank water reserves as well.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Shelley Sourcewell?
Yes.
Keith Dias?
Yes.
Frank Donato?
Yes.
Justin Lane?
Yes.
Robert Harris?
Yes.
Marlon Barnes?
Yes.
Gary Van Dam?
Yes.
It's approved.
Okay, that brings us to A3, consideration of possible action to approve and award chemical bid contracts for fiscal year 2018-2019. Staff and management went over this with us, and who wants to go?
I can cover it.
Matt's going to give a report on that.
All right, good evening. Included in your packet is a brief memo and the supporting documents related to this item. So what was discussed yesterday and the committee concurred is staff sent out a request for proposal for 3 primary chemicals that we use here at the various treatment plants. It's aluminum sulfate, the 12.5% sodium hypochlorite, which is our disinfectant, and zinc orthophosphate. So included in your packet is a summary of the bid results. It's the last page of this item. You can see we received 3 bids for alum, or aluminum sulfate, and we're recommending to go with Thatcher, who's our current supplier, at $274.25 per dry ton. We are recommending to go with Jones Chemical for the sodium hypochlorite at 80 cents per gallon. And we're recommending to go with Thatcher for our zinc orthophosphate at 0.692 cents or dollars per pound.
Okay, I move on board order 7A3.
Second.
Any more discussion or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Shelley Sourcewell?
Yes.
Keith Dias?
Yes.
Frank Donato?
Yes.
Justin Lane?
Yes.
Robert Harris?
Yes.
Marlon Barnes?
Yes.
Gary Van Dam?
Yes.
It's approved.
Okay, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Item 7B, Adjudication and Water Master Committee. Committee Chairman Harris.
Yes, I'm going to have Matt go through the agenda. We have had a meeting on this with our committee, and just thought we'd update all of you on what's going to be happening tomorrow.
Okay. Good evening again. So included in your packet is the Water Master agenda. That is, the meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. here at AVEk offices. And a number of items on the agenda for consideration. We'll just go in chronological order based on the agenda. And under the consent agenda, we're actually going to give a presentation on the Water Master Engineer's current budget versus actual expenses. Kind of go into a little more detail as to what tasks they're currently working on and which of those tasks are over budget and as to why they're over budget. And just start the discussion on how we want to rectify it going forward, whether we want to do a contract amendment with them or kind of brainstorm some ideas to reduce their budget for the remaining portion of 2018.
May I ask, have you submitted our bill to them for consideration tomorrow?
No, we did not. We discussed that at the committee meeting, the AVEk committee meeting, and we've got some ideas in the future of what we're going to do with that, but for now we're going to hold off on submitting that.
Why? We gave direction to pay, to send them the bills so they can pay it, so they haven't billed them all year.
Yeah, let me answer that. Yeah.
Okay.
The assessments right now, our budget and how much we have doesn't allow us to pay those bills. We have assessments coming in that will. We had agreed to, I think, cap our expenses between Palmdale and AVEk at $45,000 for the budget cycle, which will be paid. But right now, it's not good timing. We discussed it in our Water Master Committee meeting, and the consensus of the three of us at that meeting was to hold off at this time on submitting the bills and to have this discussion tonight about that.
Well, I'm very disappointed in that, because you should still be sending the bill whether or not they can pay it or not. It puts them also on notice that they owe that money. Because right now, from the last meeting, I had the feeling that some of the board members thought that we weren't going to bill them, that we were just doing this with no consideration.
Yeah, no, that has, as far as I know, that certainly has never been my feeling. I know that we had presented in the budget, I believe, $45,000
That's correct.
for the administrative
And that's
use.
just for us. Isn't that just for our services, not for Palmdale's?
That the line item in the Water Master budget is just admin services. That doesn't
Okay.
differentiate between the two agencies.
Okay, I thought I understood.
And-
what you're saying.
And just a little background on how we derived at that 45,000. I mean, it wasn't based on an estimate number of hours. If you recall, there's a certain amount of revenue that we're projecting to generate from the assessments this year with Water Master. And we had previous commitments with the Water Master engineer contract, the attorney cost, and some miscellaneous costs like the GlowTrans website. So that 45,000 was basically what was left of the revenue versus committed expenses. And that's when we had the discussion back at that time that AVEk would commit to 2018 at that $45,000.
Well, I think that it needs to be a little bit more scientific than that, because we don't want to seem like we have a gift of public funds.
Yeah, and we are tracking our actual hours
Okay,
associated with it. And that's something that even the advisory committee, Water Master Advisory Committee, they formed a subcommittee to look into the administrative services for the Water Master. And so one of our tasks is to share with them our log of actual hours spent for, Dwayne, myself, Patty, and a couple others, and categorize what we're spending our time on, because that'll help in the long term as to what the long-term needs are for the Water Master admin to sustain an adequate level of service.
I actually jumped in on this thing too. I felt the same way you did, Shelley, on the billing. Then Matt was breaking it down for us, asked to have a little more time before we submit this bill to the group, and give us more definite numbers so we can come back at them with this, because we all agree, we think there's an underestimate here on a lot of things, so it would be great if we could just wait a couple more weeks to address this thing and then submit the good bill.
So we're going to go through that under the consent calendar tomorrow morning. And then the action items that are scheduled for tomorrow is there's 2 public hearings. There's one on storage agreements and another one on carryover water. These are both draft rules and regulations that the Water Master Engineer has prepared They've been out for 30 days for public comment. Tomorrow is strictly the public hearing. We're hoping that, Bill in his office has had a chance to review these two draft sections, and they've got some comments that they'd like to discuss further with Wayne and myself to present to our committee before our representative on Water Master Board recommends approving these two sections. So our recommendation for tomorrow for AVEk is to take a position to kind of listen to what the public comments are and then bring these two items back at the next month meeting. We don't feel there's any big rush that's holding up anything related to Water Master on these two items, so that's our recommendation at this time. There's a few forms that are scheduled to be modified tomorrow. Those shouldn't be a problem. We're recommending those modifications take place. There's new well production applications. This is a standing item on the Water Master agenda for the Water Master engineer to present their findings on new well applications. So I think there's a handful of new well applications being considered tomorrow.
And we're going to be approving our first commercial well tomorrow, so if it gets approved.
I believe you're right. I think it's like 14 acre feet per year.
That's for a church or?
A church, yeah. And it is classified as a commercial well. Because a lot of the ones that we previously have approved have been domestic wells.
What qualifies it as a commercial well? Is it the capacity?
I believe it's the annual production.
Production.
On that. Yeah. And then we've got an amendment to the previously approved transfers forms that's going to be considered tomorrow. We're recommending approving that new resolution, and it has to do with clarifying what happens to the water rights, or the voting rights, I should say, when a transfer takes place with production rights. So as you know now, under Exhibit 4, landowners, they all have voting rights associated with them to vote for their landowner representative. So this clarifies what happens to those voting rights when a transfer takes place of those production rights. And then we're continuing the saga on the pre-ramp down discussion for Exhibit 3. So we'll see where that goes. And that's all I have to report, unless Rob or the committee members had anything to add.
Matt, anything on the existing wells that we have approved?
So once they get approved by the Water Master Board, then the Water Master engineer signs off, or everybody's approval is taking place, so the producer is free to proceed with drilling the well or constructing the well.
I know in our advisory meeting, we discussed that there was 3 big ag wells that were in question.
Yeah, that's a good point. At the advisory committee, they brought up the concept of the committee wants to review and approve all new well applications before it goes to the board. Where I recall the decision was that the committee was involved in the process and the development of forms and what information would be submitted, and then it would be left up to the engineer to review the data and make a recommendation to the Water Master Board, and not have to take each individual one through the advisory committee. So that may or may not come back up for the board to consider changing the process for well application approval.
Just a comment. I'd be opposed to any action by the advisory committee that would slow down the process. I think that through the advisory committee and the Water Master Board has done a great job getting a process that moves us along quickly, that it's something that the public can be assured that it's going to be looked at the same way, and I would see no reason to insert the advisory committee into that decision-making process.
Well, I disagree with you, Rob, because the advisory committee always looks at everything prior to the water master getting it. So they don't hold it up, they actually help along.
Right, and if the advisory committee is advising, I have no problem with that, and if you look at it before, but I would not support anything that would put the decision-making process in the advisory committees or have them making the decision or making a decision to slow the process up. So maybe we're saying the same things, I'm not sure, but That's my position and will be my position tomorrow.
Right, I agree with you there. I know some of the members of the advisory committee just felt like they were kind of left out. They was part of everything else, and they kind of snuck by them, so they just had a question.
Well, if they were part of putting together the form and asking the questions, there must be guidelines to what the answers need to be. So
There are,
that,
so.
that takes it, that means the advisory committee did their job. And it should be able to, I would think, go to the board after it goes through. That's just my opinion.
Well,
So
yeah, we
it
have.
takes more time and money.
We have the format down now. We've made it what I think the public would see as a pretty streamlined process, and to put any impediments into that process, I just
It would be a
oppose.
shame after all their hard work.
Exactly.
Right, maybe Matt could go a little into it because he was at the advisory meeting and there was just some members that felt like they didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, and it has to do with at the last Water Master Board meeting, there were 3 new production wells approved that are on LA County Sanitation District property, and they're larger production wells. And there were comments by committee members, advisory committee members, that they didn't know anything about it, and it was almost like accusatory that it was snuck through the Water Master Board, where that's not the case. As with all these applications, they're all provided in advance in the board agenda packet, so all parties have an opportunity to review it, and if they have a comment or a concern about any of the new well applications, at the board meeting, there's an opportunity to comment on that. So nobody missed, I mean, if somebody overlooked it, that's one thing, but it wasn't that these were snuck through or not put out for public comment, if that makes sense.
Good report, man. Thank you.
All right. And that's all on the Water Master agenda for tomorrow, so it sounds like there's direction for our representative. Do you have anything to add, Bill? No.
Thank you. Item 8A, Principal Engineers Report. Virgil?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll be presenting on the status of the Eastside Banking and Blending site work remediation. And you can see I have a slideshow, and supplement to that, you can see in your agenda packet, page 53 of 58 and 54, if you'd like to follow along in the staff report. So this was presented to the Finance Committee yesterday, and I'll be going through the current status of the Eastside Water Bank remediation. So what we'll be discussing first is what the project is. I know it's been a while since it was actually completed, so I wanted to update everybody, and then the assessment. And from there, we'll talk about AVEk's board recommendation for the peer review, who was selected, and then the current remediation effort status. So the Eastside Water Bank site work is at 96th Street East and Avenue U out in Little Rock, and it is 3 potable water wells on an 80-acre parcel, along with 3 engineered recharge basins and a pump station. This project was completed in July of 2016. Contract total ended up being $8,275,000 and change, and paid to date is the approved contract total less $100,000, and that $100,000 is being held by AVEk until the remediation efforts are completed. What we found at the completion of construction, we began to fill the basins with State Water Project water from the aqueduct, and determined that settlement was occurring not only in the basins themselves, but in the adjacent roadways, and cracking began to occur in the roadways as well as in the gunite panels. As you can see in these photos here, evidence of that cracking, and AVEk's insistence on pursuing Kennedy Jenks for an assessment of these issues and a resolution. So there was cracking in the berms and roadways that caused by consolidation of native soil and the shotcrete panels as well. AVEk then pursued Tetra Tech based on Kennedy Jenks' assessment of the conditions to do an independent assessment and made a couple additional recommendations, the first of which was to not only import sandy soil, but to water jet it into the cracks in the roadways. And that work has since been completed. And along with that, they recommended to wait approximately a year from the assessment from Tetra Tech to allow the settlement to be sufficiently completed and have Nicholas Construction remobilize to correct all the gunite pond liners, anything larger than 1/16 of an inch, and that current status is partially completed. The first of the 3 ponds was dry, so they were able to go in there and correct those issues. And then in the early fall, they will remobilize and complete ponds 2 and 3 once they're all dried out. So with that, no board action is requested today. Just a heads up that staff, once the work is completed, would recommend that the remaining retention be released to Nicholas Construction. A few photos, and then if you have any questions, let me know.
Any questions for Virgil? Evidently not. Thank you, Virgil.
Thank you.
Item 8B, General Manager's Report. Matt?
All right, good evening. So before I get started, I have some good news. Mr. Chisholm is out of state celebrating the birth of his grandson. And just a couple hours ago, I got a message that a healthy baby boy has been born. So, yeah. The baby and mom are doing well. So. How's he? I don't know. Probably a little stressed. All right, so we've got a brief presentation here. Oops, I already messed it up here for you.
Just click off of it. There you go. Uh-oh.
Okay.
You take over for a second.
Okay.
Should be corrected.
All right. Status update. California Water Fix joint exercise of powers agreement has been signed by various agencies. Delta Conveyance Design and Construction JPA, who oversees the design and construction of the California Water Fix project, and the Resource Delta Conveyance Office, who oversees work of the new Delta Conveyance Design and Construction JPA. So progress is being made related to that. Status update on the Orville spillway repairs, main spillway. DWR has received state and federal approvals to continue with their work scheduled for this year. Construction has resumed, and they have their November 1st DWR milestone for major construction work completed. So DWR is meeting with independent consultants for quality control. That's an ongoing regular process. Also on the Orville spillway repairs, they're working on the emergency spillway. If you recall before, they were working on the main spillway. This work continues on the emergency spillway, and they have some secant pile cutoff walls that they're working on. It's about 1,500 feet in length, and they're drilling the piles about 35 to 60 feet deep into bedrock. So good progress there. I was hoping to have some photos, but we don't have that. Average statewide snow content, north is about 16% of average, central California is about 20% of average, and south is 16% of average. Statewide, through all the 3 regions, is about 17% of normal for the state. So quite a bit below average, but you'll see our water supply still remains favorable due to storage conditions. Let's see, precipitation to date for this water year, 39.4 for the Northern Sierra, and then Southern California, or Southern Sierra is 29.4 inches. Both right around 78 or 80% of average for the state. Here's a look. We had some slides that look at the national and state forecast for precipitation. This is short term over the next 6 to 10 days. You can see it's pretty normal for this time of year throughout California and Southern California, which is pretty dry. Next slide. This is a June outlook, so it looks out a little further. Again, very average for this time of year and dry for precipitation. And then if you look at temperatures, we're right about just above normal for this time of year throughout California. A little warmer for being above average through the middle part of the country. And then if you look at the June outlook, just slightly above normal throughout the state of California for the month of June. This is the index that we were talking about. This is the 8-station Northern Sierra Precipitation Index. We're at 39.4. You can see the average is about 51, it looks like. So we'll probably remain pretty flat from this point on, and probably end the year pretty close to that 39.4, or maybe just slightly above that. This is looking at reservoir conditions throughout the state. Lake Oroville, see there, about 83% of average. Current, it's about 69% total capacity for this time of year, and 83% of average. And this is Lake Oroville storage. We're about 2.5 million acre-feet of storage in Lake Oroville. You can see it's starting to dip off just slightly there from the peak that we saw at the last meeting. And this is a typical graph that shows actual storage and the flood regulation storage. So it's about 1.4, 1.5 of actual storage in Lake Oroville. And then this is looking at San Luis Reservoir, pretty full, 95% of average, 80% full right now. And that's the slide that shows that the people, as the weather's warming up, people are pulling water out of San Luis, so we're seeing that storage dip down over the last month or so. So we're about 1.6 million acre-feet storage. State water project supply, we've got some good news just today that the state water project allocation increased from 30 to 35%. So this the 43,453 acre-feet reflects 30%, so it'll be slightly more than that. So that's great news. As you know, based on the water supply plan that we've presented for 2018, we're in good shape with the amount of water that we have in carryover from 2017, as well as our table A for 2018, and then the amount of water that we have in storage to meet all of our customer demands. So we'll come up with a plan and present it to the board on what our recommendations are to do with that additional 5%. Treated water deliveries, current flows are steadily increasing. You can see Quartzville plant is this week is up to 27 MGD. I think it was at 24 roughly at the last meeting. Roseman is creeping up a little bit. That plant's back online and running well. 5.5 MGD. East side about 2 MGD. And Acton through the Palmdale interconnection, we're serving just under 1 million gallons a day. And you can see compared to last year's flow, we're up slightly. And then through the geopurification process, current flows for east side about 1.6 million gallons per day, west side, and this is recovered water. So we're recovering 1.6 million gallons per day from east side, west side, about 3.5 million gallons per day, delivering that through 80th and H turnout with LA County Waterworks. And then total is about 4.9. Bench Ranch remains off. Water quality remains well. Good. We took our THM samples last week, which is our quarterly samples, regulatory samples. We anticipate receiving the results in mid-May, and we anticipate good results, but we'll report that back to the board as soon as we receive them. And just some quick updates. We mentioned the Water Master Board meeting tomorrow morning here at 10 o'clock. We've got the Orange County Water Summit next Friday, June 1st, in Anaheim. We have the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors meeting on June 14th at 6 p.m. Palmdale Water District. And last, we have a AVEk informational meeting. As you know, we've started our water system master plan with Grohl Engineers, also known as the strategic plan implementation plan, I believe it is. I refer to it as water system master plan. We've scheduled a meeting with all of our customers next Tuesday at 11 a.m. We've had pretty good response, at least from the major retail agencies, that they will be here. And it's really an informational gathering meeting, both to explain what our process is in preparation of the water system master plan, and try to get as much information from them as to what they anticipate their future needs are and demands are. So that's all I have to report, and Mr. Chisholm will be out the rest of this week and scheduled to return next Tuesday.
Any more questions for Matt? Thank you, Matt. Item 9, Director's Reports. Rob?
No report, thank you.
Marlon? Shelley?
I just wanted to report about the Bay Delta tour that I took this past week up in the Sacramento, San Francisco, all up in the Delta there. And I learned that the Delta is huge. I mean, I knew it was good, but it's really huge. It's something to see. And I learned that islands that they refer to are not islands as we know them. Like, I'm thinking Channel Islands, and there's islands out there, and they're all just kind of connecting, but they call them islands. And they have a lot of subsidence out there, and a lot of rooms that they've had built up over the years, and they talked about the invasive species, and they discussed why water has to be, as Frank says, dumped into the ocean, and why there's so much that does, and it's for the saltwater invasion, more so than the fish, which was, I know that's a debatable subject, but it made a lot of sense. There were a lot of smart people on the bus, a lot of scientists, a lot of environmentalists and such, but they knew their stuff. They knew what they were talking about. So it was a great 3 days. It was very long. We started at 7 in the morning and end after dinner, and even during dinner and breakfast, they have speakers. The whole time on the bus, they have a speaker. Your mind doesn't have one moment to rest, except for when you sneak away to your room to go to bed for the night, but it's a really great experience, and I encourage any directors that haven't been to go. It's really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Frank?
No, I'm fine.
Justin, do you have a report?
No report this evening.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, Shelley, so how did they know that the salt water was intruding on the groundwater?
Well, you can see the salt water, you can see the salt on the edges, and you can test the water to see that it's infiltrating the delta, and it can't do that, otherwise we'll lose that water source. I mean, it's a huge reservoir.
So those wells that are being used inland are high in salt because of the intrusion?
I don't know about that. I can't speak to that, but it wasn't so much about the fish, but they really had some interesting displays, and they even took us to the Delta smelt plant where they actually breed the smelt so they can do experiments with them. Not like with the water flow and things like that. It's not like they're dissecting them alive. But it was very interesting.
So they're releasing water into the ocean for scientific.
To keep the salt water at bay. Otherwise, if they didn't have the water go out,
Then there was a name.
then because it's a reverse flow, and it would go into the delta and it would ruin the delta. The vegetation and the birds and the fish would all die.
Everything gets affected.
Right.
Item 10, attorney's report. Bill? Item 11, closed session. I believe we need to go into closed session for 2 items tonight.
Yeah, that'd be items C and E.
Do I have a motion?
Move we go into closed session.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Travis Russell,
Yes.
Keith Dias.
Yes.
Frank Donato,
Yes.
Justin Lane,
Yes.
Robert Harris,
Yes.
Marlon Barnes,
Yes.
Gary Huntington.
Yes.
Carried. We'll now go into closed session.